Steve Harvey, the suit-clad king of comedy, the voice that made mornings bearable on radio, the man who turned Family Feud into a ratings juggernaut. To millions, he is the master of the punchline. But to himself, he has often been a man at war, with poverty, with loss, with his own past. This is the story of a man who fell, rose, fell again, and still found the strength to keep smiling. Steve was born Broderick Stephen Harvey on January 17, 1957, in Welch, West Virginia. Coal dust clung to his father's boots, chalk clung to his mother's hands, but hope rarely clung to their small, cold house. When the family moved to Cleveland, the Harveys settled on East 112th Street, a neighborhood where sirens were louder than lullabies. Steve was shy and stuttered painfully. Speaking up in class felt like being dropped in front of a firing squad. Then came the day that would haunt him for decades. His teacher asked the class to write down what they wanted to be. Steve wrote, "I want to be on television." The teacher ripped the paper and told him to be realistic. Steve went home humiliated, until his father told him something that would change his life. "Put it back on paper, boy. Read it every morning. Read it every night. You can't let anyone else tell you who you are." That single piece of paper became a prophecy. After high school, Steve drifted from job to job. Carpet cleaner, insurance salesman, boxer, even postman. But the fire never left. One night in 1985, Steve stood backstage at a small Cleveland comedy club, hands sweating. When his name was called, he stepped into the light. The first joke hit. Then the second. By the third, the room erupted. He walked outside clutching $50, tears streaming. "This," he whispered, "is who I am." But destiny wasn't a straight line. Within months, Steve was broke, sleeping in a 1976 Ford. For 3 years, he lived like that. Public pool showers became his morning routine. Cheap sandwiches kept him alive. On nights when he couldn't find a place to park, he would sit awake, staring at the dashboard, wondering if the dream was worth the suffering. The breaking point almost came. Steve was ready to quit. Until he checked his answering machine. 2 comedy clubs had left him offers. Together, the gigs paid $300. Just enough for a flight to New York for showtime at the Apollo. That moment became the hinge of his life. In Harlem, Steve stepped onto the Apollo stage and unleashed every ounce of hunger he'd carried since Cleveland. The laughter hit him like oxygen. He became host, carrying Apollo for 7 years. But the grind was merciless. 18-hour days, sleepless nights. The weight of knowing every joke had to feed him for another day. He would later say, "Every laugh you heard from me in those days came from a place of pain." By the late 90s, Steve was a star, headlining The Steve Harvey Show, touring with Cedric, DL, and Bernie Mac for Kings of Comedy, and selling out arenas. But success came with its own cost. The very thing he had once prayed for now took him away from home. He later admitted, "The world knew me, but my kids barely did." Steve married Marcia Harvey in 1981. They had 3 children together, and for a time, they were his anchor. But the bills stacked up, gigs didn't always pay, and the pressure turned love into silence. By 1994, their marriage collapsed. Steve lost not just a wife, but years with his children. He has said this remains one of his life's deepest regrets. In 1996, Steve married Mary Shackelford. Together, they had a son, Winton, who Steve often calls my compass. But success was exploding. Sitcom tapings, Apollo stand-up tours, and the marriage couldn't withstand the distance. The divorce in 2005 became public and messy, with accusations flying in every direction. Courts dismissed most claims, but Steve was scarred. Personally, financially, spiritually. It wasn't just a divorce, he said later. It was a crucible. It burned me down to nothing. After the divorce dust settled, Steve faced a nightmare. His accountants had failed to file his taxes for 7 years. He owed millions. When he checked his account, it read $1,700. For a man the world assumed was rich, the humiliation was crushing. He took every gig he could. Radio at dawn, TV tapings by day, stand-up at night. Every laugh I told back then was bought with fear, he said. But he paid every dollar back. Then came 2015. Under the blazing lights of Miss Universe, Steve made one of the most infamous mistakes in live television: announcing the wrong winner. Memes went viral. Critics predicted his career was over. But Steve faced the cameras, apologized, and then did the unthinkable. Came back the next year to host again. It wasn't about ratings. It was about redemption. In 2007, Steve married Marjorie Bridges, the woman who, in his words, saved my life. Together, they blended 7 children into one family. At first, there were walls between them. Steve broke those walls with consistency. When Marjorie's son Jason told him live on TV, "You gave me your last name. There's no one better than you, Dad." Steve wept. Not as a celebrity, but as a man finally forgiven. Steve Harvey is no longer just a comedian. Through Steve Harvey Global, he's expanded into television, radio, books, motivational events, and even international versions of Family Feud. He has turned past mistakes into masterclasses, mentoring young comedians, giving scholarships, funding youth programs. His Atlanta estate may be 17 acres of luxury, but what Steve brags about most isn't the pool, or the theater, or the ballroom. It's the dinner table where all his kids sit together. At 68, Steve Harvey stands as a man who has faced humiliation, bankruptcy, divorce, and ridicule, and still risen higher every time. He often says, "God's plan for you is bigger than the mistakes you've made." The boy whose dream was torn apart in a classroom now lives inside millions of living rooms every night. But his true legacy isn't Family Feud or his suits. It's the lesson he leaves behind: that no matter how many times you're knocked down, you can get back up. And that the greatest crown is not fame. It's family, forgiveness, and faith.